How's it going? You're listening to Jules and Bullets, the You and My Discography podcast, a show where a You and My fan and a You and My super fan discuss each of the band's records. I'm Thommy Waite, an Aussie writer and podcaster who's based out of Atlanta, Georgia, baby. And I'm the You and My fan in the equation. My co-host and You and My super fan is Sydney-sider Johnno Duncan, the host of the Progressive Rugby League Podcast and general man about town. Johnno, how the bloody hell are you?
Hey, Tom. I'm doing good. Always good to be here, mate.
I don't, for any other podcast I've ever done, I don't have a script of any description. And with this one, I thought I'm going to cut myself a break. I'm going to give myself a script that I can just read every episode. But there's a part of my brain that decides, no, like a fucking thespian who tries to put a different intonation on every word every single time because I'm trying to be unique. But anyway, it's annoying me as I do that. It's probably annoying you. Today in episode 6, we're talking Deliverance from 2002. Am I correct here?
Yeah, that sounds right. Roughly.
Yeah. And that was 1 year after the prior record, Dress Me Slowly, which came out in 2001. Before we get stuck into the record, a quick disclaimer. Myself and Johnno are in no way affiliated to UMI, which is just two fans talking music for the love of the game. If you found this show, there's a good chance you're already familiar with the group known as UMI, but if not, listen to their records, go to their shows, send them all your money and love. They bloody deserve it. Johnno, you seem like a man who knows every line and paragraph of the HR manual at work, so you can spot a microaggression a mile off. Tell me, how do you think this disclaimer holds up from a legal perspective?
Well, I feel like if we ever did get into trouble for this, it'd be like that Seinfeld season where they're making the sitcom Jerry. And, you know, when Jerry gets into a car accident or something and the judge determines that the other guy has to be his butler. I'm imagining that if we get found guilty by a judge, I'd be sentenced to starting a You and My street team or something like we discussed last time, You know. Street team of middle-aged men where we roam around Sydney, subtly moving UMI records and CDs to the front of the Y displays, in front of youth group, in front of Yola Tengo, in front of Neil Young. Sorry, Neil. Imagine it being like, you know, a men's shed of something or something like that. So, yeah, well, that's the worst that can happen. That's not too bad.
Yeah. Maybe my punishment would be to attempt to transcribe the first 3 UMI records like Davey Lane did on the guitar, except nice. I'm only proficient with C major, G major, and D major, and so I'm going to really struggle, and I'm just going to be, stuck in a eternity of pain as I try and figure out the licks and the chords.
Yeah. There's some complicated chords out there.
Yeah, defos. All right, so the format for the show is pretty simple. For the intro, we'll just discuss some of the things that led up to the recording of Deliverance. Then we'll go through the record track by track. And to round things off, we'll talk about what happened after the album dropped and give our gold, silver, bronze medals for the tunes on the album. So I was mentioning to Johnno before we started recording that one glaring oversight we've made with this podcast is we haven't really spent too much time analyzing or even discussing the album titles. So why don't we start there? Deliverance. Why do you think they called this record Deliverance? Apart from the fact that there's a song called Deliverance on the record itself. Johnno, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, we spoke last week about the pressures in and around the band during the Dress Me Slowly recording process. Well, like Deliverance feels very much like a reaction to all that stuff. Deliverance is defined as the action of being rescued or set free. So I could just say that, but I'm going to go on a spiel for a couple of minutes, because I'm Johnno Duncan. So where Dress Me Slowly was largely recorded by a biggish name American producer, Deliverance is self-produced. Where Dress Me Slowly was a tad serious, Deliverance feels a bit looser. Where Dress Me Slowly was kind of set up to break through, Deliverance essentially shuns that worldview. So musically, it feels broader and more relaxed, and like they've just released the pressure valve. And in a way, it seems that Dress Me Slowly recording process, that the band had come to the realization that the hit machine side of the music business is not for them. I guess they always knew that, but maybe they didn't know how to reconcile where they found themselves with what they wanted to do. In any case, the focus kind of had to be back to the basics of making good records with good people, and whatever would come from that would be a bonus. So there's an element of freedom on this album, freedom from the pressures and expectations that built up over the early years, and which probably became a weight on their shoulders over time. And that freedom probably stemmed from an acceptance that, maybe their popularity had peaked and that was okay. And in hindsight, this acceptance that they're probably not the next big thing anymore or the hottest band on the scene anymore probably saved the band and made them a sustainable proposition. I mean, there's just not that many bands anywhere on the planet still going strong after 30 plus years that are still pushing themselves to make interesting records that still have a solid following that goes beyond mere nostalgia. So I think, yes, people want to hear the hits, but for fans, a new You're My album still feels exciting and fresh. And I think the position they find themselves in now, still going strong, but on their own terms, can be traced back to this period. Are we a big deal anymore? Maybe not. Does that matter? Not particularly. Does it stop us from making good records? Absolutely not. Do we want to keep doing this? Yes, but on our terms. Because otherwise, what's the point? I mean, if you're in the arts and what you're creating is not a true representation of what's inside you, then maybe you should be in advertising, which, not a bad thing. There's heaps of solid people in advertising that do good, interesting, creative work, but they're not communicating what's inside them. It's someone else's story. So I'm glad You're My, even when the pressure was on, they always delivered a representation of their own soul. And maybe there were brief glimmers when it was a strained version, but even so, it was always their own. And I'm glad they escaped a period that could have been terminal, with some clear air and some clear thinking about what matters and what doesn't. Because when you boil it all down, there are really only two types of things that matter and things that don't. And to me, with the usual caveats of what the fuck would I know, Deliverance is the sound of a band who's come to that realization and understanding of what matters and, more importantly, what doesn't. And that's what probably saved them. And yes, I could have saved everyone a couple of minutes by just noting the definition of deliverance as the action of being rescued or set free, but that wouldn't be much fun, would it? So in any case, listening to the album over the past couple of weeks and piecing together that kind of framing in my mind has got me really excited about talking about Deliverance. So, yeah, exciting.
There isn't too much on Wiki about the record, but there is a very brief little Rogers quote. Released September 20. That's when the record was released in September 2002 on the label BMG. Tim Rogers later said of the album, "We just wanted 3-minute songs about being in love and rooting and loving being in a rock and roll band, and I think everyone associated with us absolutely hates it." So I think that illuminates the schism where they were at artistically, creatively, compared to the kind of business side of the industry. And just on a personal note, when I was at university and I was in the drama department doing a parody of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for those playing at home, I played Bebop, one of Shredder's hapless accomplices. There was a really a kind of highbrow gal in the drama troupe, and after a show one night or a rehearsal, we're just sitting around having a few cans, as you want to do, as the thespians like to do. And she said, "Do you honestly know anyone who uses the word rooting to describe sex? I heard someone say it the other day, and I just couldn't believe someone would actually say that." And didn't say anything at the time. The way I operate is I internalize things like that, and then and just never forget it. And since that day, I've always loved the word rootin' to describe the act of love. And I'm glad Rogers seems to be share the same love of the word. And just a quick note to take a step back, the album before, one thing I didn't realize until after we'd recorded the Dress Me Slowly pod episode was that Dress Me Slowly, it comes from a Spanish phrase translated to English, means dress me slowly because I'm in a hurry, as in do it once, do it right, or don't rush things. Which and as Spaniards and Spanish speaking people are wont to do, they do it in a far more poetic way that us English speakers do. But yeah, I think that's an interesting just comparison of the fact that was a kind of considered attempt at pop breakthrough, perhaps, that record, and it was kind of Dress Me Slowly because I'm in a hurry to become rich and famous, perhaps. But then whereas Deliverance, it's about having fun. And just to touch on your point, Johnno, I think a lot of bands get to the point that maybe you and I were out 4 or 5 albums in, and maybe they're in no man's land because they realize the commercial avenue isn't working or isn't working as well as it was a few years prior when they were younger and brighter-eyed and bushier-tailed. But then they've also lost the love of the music, what got them involved in the first place. So I think that's what's exciting about this album, is that it's kind of like the beginning of the second part of their career, and it's evident that they still love the music, man. So that's pretty cool that they're not in no man's land. They're like doing it for the music, no matter what. So that's kind of my thoughts in terms of the preamble here.
Yeah, and just on your reference to the word rootin', when you were saying that when that anecdote, I was thinking, well, how else do you just describe it? How else are you meant to describe it? You know?
I know. Come on. I thought that was the growing up in the suburbs of Australia. That's rootin'. They're just making more of us. Come on, mate. Nothing wrong with that. Okay. Yeah. So why don't we jump into the tracks, and then there's a bunch more we can kind of talk about after we've gone through all the tracks in terms of what was happening.
Just before we get into the tracks, I do have a little anecdote to share, which I think as you and my fans, people listening, they might appreciate. So with Deliverance, for whatever reason, this is the album I probably had the longest listening drought before starting this pod. So I may not have listened to Deliverance for 6-7 years before this week. And it's not because I think it's a weak album. I think it's a strong album. And so anyway, I'm listening to the record during the week while washing the dishes, and my girlfriend, who I've lived with for about 5 years, comes in and says, I haven't heard any of these songs before. Is this one of the dud albums? I said, whoa, stop the tape. Where did you learn that kind of language? Are your ears painted on? You know, what are you not hearing from the sounds bounding from the speakers? This is no dud. This is affirmation. This is Deliverance. And I went on and on. And I should say she left the room right at the start of that spiel. I'm basically telling it to a bathroom door at this point. But I went on to defend the band's honour, my honour, your honour, and everyone listening's honour. Is this one of the duds? You know what I mean? It's a great album, so I think I should get into it. It's a strong, robust album.
Johnno Duncan, ladies and gents. That's why we love him. He talks to bathroom walls. He thinks nothing of it. He'll talk to every wall in your house and the doors and the windows. He'll do it for free as well. All right, so jumping into the tracks. Johnno, track 1, Words for Sadness. Tell me your thoughts.
You know, when a book is made into a film, Tommy, I have a theory that assuming they're both of decent quality, people's preference is pretty much always of the version they consumed first. You know, people will try intellectualize it, but I think when you get into one of those conversations of book v film, just ask, which one did you consume first? And then you can change the subject. Now, this could also be true of different versions of songs, although not quite to the same degree, I think, due to the way we're all constituted musically. But anyway, I mention this because this song was originally released by Australian country singer Lisa Miller. Tim lent the lyrics to her for her album Car Tapes, and it's a beautifully melancholic country-tinged folky rendition, which I took to and I thought was really great. Then in the lead up to the release of Deliverance, I read that they were starting off the album with this tune, and I was absolutely stoked. Couldn't wait to hear it. I pictured a similar vibe, really. I guess my imagination is/was limited. So I was imagining something folky or country tinged, a bit of longing, a pinch of yearning, and I was all in for it. And then I remember hearing it, and it starts with like a moody jam before the song proper kicks off, with like the rich crunching tones of Tim's guitar. And then I'm like, oh shit, it's a rocker. And then the song unfolds the way it does. And so I really like this version, but I think initially, gun to head, I would have lent towards Lisa Miller's version. I think for You Are My's version, there was something about it which didn't quite hit me. I think maybe at the time I felt Tim's vocals were slightly too far back in the mix, maybe, or potentially a bit muffled. But really, it might have been just because I'd heard Lisa Miller's version first.
Yeah, I would agree with that takeaway in terms of the comparison games that we play. And usually the one that kind of makes the first dent makes the deepest dent. The vocals being buried way deeper in the mix was really the first thing that jumped out at me, especially in comparison to the Dress Me Slowly songs where, it's front and center, Tim's voice. I actually didn't know the Lisa Miller anecdote that you shared, and I was just wondering, has You and I ever played like the Tamworth Music Fest, or because I heard Jack White say something interesting once where he was like, he'd always loved rockabilly music. I think like in his teenage years, he got really into it, but then he was very conscious of the fact that like if you become a rockabilly artist, you're pigeonholed. This is your lane. You got to stay in it, and you might have a career, but you can never hope to cross pollinate that far. And but if you're just a straight up and down rock band, you can veer into the country and western. You can veer into rockabilly. You can veer into folk, and acquire new fans, but still kind of just pull them into a bigger pool. So I'm curious, like, because I know Tim's made country tinged solo records, but like how much has the band kind of like directly embraced the kind of country music scene?
I don't think they really have ever really been part of that, I think. Tim's probably played those kind of festivals, but I don't recall him ever playing Tamworth. But yeah, I think Tamworth is like a different beast. It's kind of your like Lee Kernaghan and sort of really
pop country
channel sort of area. Maybe I might be wrong. I'm not too into it, but yeah. So I don't think they've ever gone down. But yeah, I guess if any album leans slightly towards country, it's probably this one out of their catalog.
Yeah. But yeah, and I just the only other thing that really jumped out at me was the lyrics. So I bash out a 3-chord wonder, because that's the only thing we had. I transcribed it wrong, but I think in terms of like a mission statement, get back to basics, have some fun again. 3 chords, get the lads over, plug in, get a few beers, and let's make a record, baby. So I think that kind of summarizes the vibe of Deliverance from the outset.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's kind of like the savior in the end as well. And so there's another sort of anecdote. Tim and Lisa Miller did a duet on Tim's second debut album, Spit Polish, called Damn Songs, which is a fantastic song. And then this week I made a conscious effort to listen to both those versions, You Are Mine's and Lisa Miller's version, side by side. I hadn't listened to either version for years, and happy to say I loved both. But this time I probably ended up leaning towards You Are Mine's version, and not because we're doing this pod. I know what you're all thinking, but it's a strong tune. I still have some misgivings about the sound of it, but it's feedback at the margins, lyrical quality, guitars front and center, sounding good. Probably in hindsight a very welcome counterpoint to Lisa Miller's version. It would have been weird if they just did like a similar version to hers. And so they sit very nicely next to each other. So it's a solid start to the album, and it makes more sense as a start to the album the longer you delve into it and the more you think about what Deliverance is about. So good tune. All
right, track 2, Who Put the Devil in You, which was the lead single. Am I correct thinking that?
Yes. Yep, I think it was, yeah. Great tune. I love the effect on the guitar that makes it really crackle in the intro. I love Rusty's cymbal work that really complements that perfectly. I love that the backing vocalists kick us off with, I got too much on my mind. I love the Dallas Crane and Motley Crue references. And the last 60 seconds of the song from the solo really just climaxes perfectly. It's building up. There are some sweet harmonizing woos. And then I hid all the speed in my shoe. Who put the devil in you? And then the outro lyrics kind of reaffirming that, yes, we, you and I, are indeed not going anywhere. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I really, really rate this song as a real crunching tune.
Yeah, I think it's because I grew up reading many kind of musical magazines and websites, Enemy, Q Magazine. Occasionally, I'll catch myself using a very music journo adjective to describe a certain aspect of a song within my own head, not for broadcast, not like I'm sharing my thoughts in any format, but when I was re-listening to this record over the last couple of weeks, and the riff kicks on, in my head I was like, ooh, muscular. That's what jumped out at me. I thought, what a muscular riff. And and another kind of, it's funny how music does this to you, just kind of makes you ping pong around memories and thoughts and stuff. And I've got too much on my mind. The backing vocals that you referenced that kick off the song. When I was living in Colombia, I used to have a regular meet up with my buddies once a week, usually at a pool hall. And one of my friends who was very typically a punctual type of person, he was like half an hour late. And he'd let us know that he'd had a really rough day at work, and then on the way to the pool hall, he'd try to pick up some Mary Jane from his guy, and that had fallen through, and he was pissed off about that. And so we finally got there, and I was like, "Buddy, how you doing?" And he just said, "Tommy, I need a beer, a cigarette, a joint, a shot, and a blowjob." and it was just he had too much on his mind, and he needed to decompress. I'm not sure the order in which he was going to consume all that goodness, but it's definitely a very busy night. But it reminded me of that moment, just when you got too much on your mind. And I think both this, the opening track, and Who Put the Devil in You, I feel like they've got to have some type of following with the trucker community. If you were doing a long haul drive and you're having some marital issues, or I don't know, just needed to get away, need to fucking put the pedal to the metal. These two tracks are great opening driving tracks for long expansive roads, and just to kind of solve your problems with a bit of gasoline and maybe some drink driving. So that's my thoughts on this one. Strong choice for a single, and I love the way I've described this. I'm not sure if this is music journo territory, but the scream at the end, it's almost, I would say it's like a scared child scream. My little guy had a morning terror the other day. He was awake in the morning, but he convinced himself, as kids do, I remember doing this, that a ninja had kind of snuck into his room, and then he did a scream somewhat akin to the one that you hear at the end of this song. So I call it a scared child scream, which I think is a great way to end this track. Yeah.
Muscular is probably a good way to describe the riff. That kind of reminds me, whenever I hear indie rock, I always think of the word angular, also. The term they use to describe indie rock.
Yeah, that was everyone liked angular. And and it's interesting when you've got kind of like a muscular, pretty testosterone filled, I'd argue, kind of track, where if you've read Detours, Tim makes quite a few references to the fact that he doesn't seem to enjoy people who put, make exercise a part of their identity. That's one of the things that I picked up. He's not anti-exercise. No. He's anti-people like wearing the uniform or like telling you about their workout. And he also said that he makes a point of not looking at women, or I guess the not leering at women as some men like to do when they're working out, I guess, gym bro culture or whatever. So I am a little bit trepidatious to even use the word muscular, because I don't want to suggest that Tim is propping up the exercise community in any way, shape or form, but I feel like there's no other adjective that aptly describes the opening riff.
Yeah, I think it is that kind of song, and you know, I think you mentioned it in one of the previous eps about Dave Grohl being the ultimate rock pig. I actually could see this, you know, as a song for the Rock Pigs. I can even see, you know, Dave Grohl playing this in a stadium, you know, like, I'm bashing out the amateur blues. Come on, sing it. You know how Dave Grohl's always like, come on, and you know, sing it. Yeah. Come on, Utah. I can picture him sort of doing that with Who Put the Devil in You out of UMI's catalogue. This is probably the song. And this was the last tune that got into the hottest 100 of UMI's in the 70s somewhere, which is appropriate, I think. I guess it would be nice to remain relevant to the young crowd for decades. But on the other hand, there's something like toolies about that, you know, just hanging out with the young crowd for a bit too long. So I think it's appropriate that, you know, they're in their 30s now. This is the last time UMI will be part of the hottest 100, and then, you know, they'll move on from that demographic. So it's appropriate. Yeah.
You get a personal call from Kingsmill to say we've appreciated you having you around, but it's time that we took divergent paths at this point.
It's double J for you from now on.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so track 3, Till the Clouds Roll Away. Johnno, tell me all.
A song maybe about depression, I guess, and seeking a bit of time and understanding from your loved ones while you try to get yourself through a tough period and get yourself sorted. This song, like Weeds from Dress Me Slowly, is I think distinguished by its honesty. You know, although it's more hopeful than Weeds, I reckon. You know, one of the things that makes Tim a brilliant songwriter is his observational skill, obviously. The flip side, though, when you're an observer, is that you're also very skilled at observing your own flaws. So there's like almost a painful level of self-awareness that can, I guess, lead yourself to beating yourself up more than you otherwise should or would. But anyway, a sweet tune. And overall, I think a cautiously positive vibe. You know, he's going to push on until the clouds roll away. He kind of says at the end. So, and also a brief and rare vocal appearance by Andy Kent. I think it's Andy. There's a Kiwi lilt there, I reckon. And it's an interesting moment, you know, kind of like breaking down the fourth wall in a way. So I think it works well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I heard Andy on, I think it's like live at the Annandale Hotel. Okay. I don't know, like early, and they did a cover of Fortunate Son by CCR where Andy took lead vocal. But nice. Yeah, it was nice to see him pop up on this one. Also a little reference to his daughter, my sweet Ruby gal, on this track. And yeah, so I guess you kind of getting like early fatherhood Tim Rogers songs, which they're not really on Dress Me Slowly, are they? This would have been the first record with as a father, right?
No, I'm pretty sure he was a father during Dress Me Slowly.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure Weeds kind of references that as well.
Yeah.
It sure looks like your dad when he can still look straight at night in Weeds. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure they may have had the child by Dress Me Slowly, but yeah, could be wrong.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess probably well within the kind of, Stonesy country album thing. We've got a couple rockers, and then you've got the more kind of, I guess, what would you call this? Like a ballad with the piano and, kind of a nice little come down after the raucous energy of the first two, or I guess the driving blitz of the first two tracks. So nice little sweet come down for track 3. Track 4, Ribbons and Bows. Jono, what do you like?
Yeah.
What do you don't like?
My first exposure to the Deliverance songs was at a gig that I went to with a friend of mine, Sarah, at the time, at Sydney Uni's Manning Bar, which is a really underrated venue. And You and I played a brilliant set, and it could be up there with my favourite You and I gigs. So I remember vividly that they played Ribbons and Bows, Deliverance, and Who Put the Devil in You that night, and probably a few others from this album, but I remember those three. And it was amazing. You know, sometimes when a band plays a new song live, it's hard to grasp, you know, especially if there's a few subtleties to the tune, you know, it can get lost and all sound a bit muddy. But my memory from this night is that these tunes were immediately amazing. The sound was perfect. You can hear it and understand the lyrics, and the band were on fire. It was a great night. And I have a distinct memory of Ribbons and Bows. And I think they call it, is it the middle eight, where the band sort of departs from the chorus, verse, chorus thing. Mm-hmm. There's some sort of rocking and clapping and all that sort of stuff. And I remember them playing this and just really being enamored by it all. Tim leaning back, his guitar pointed skywards, Rusty smacking the skins in the background. It looked cool. It sounded amazing. And I remember walking out of that gig thinking, this album's like full of hits and awesome singles. And interestingly, in hindsight, Deliverance has been kind of seen as like an anti-singles album where they didn't really worry about fashioning specific singles and just made good tunes. So, you know, what would I know? But to me, Ribbons and Bows kind of has single written all over it. It's a beautiful kind of pop rock tune.
Yeah, I would agree. Beautiful little sweet pop tune. And I think the kind of the great thing about music is that it's it taps into the kind of creative, ethereal memories and kind of desires, dreams, all the kind of let's call it the arts department. But then it's also, you've got the other side, which is the kind of science and maths, the hard science. And so I feel like this song has both, in that there's one particular lyric I really like where he says, "While the gin picks the tune," and yeah, I've had many a night where, you know, I have a few too many beverages, and the next morning, like, oh, what happened last night? And then just remembering, oh, yep, I'm pretty sure I played the Ghostbusters theme music 20 times in a row and cleared out the room because that's for some reason what I wanted at the time. And so the gin has picked a tune for myself many a time. And talking, so that's the arts department. And with the hard sciences, like just the beautiful chord selection and the way the drumming aligns perfectly, where the lyric is, "It's a new state of mind," and then the do 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 do. Yeah, kind of like I think I referenced this on a song on "Dress Me Slowly," but there is some just kind of, if you're wired a certain way where you appreciate that type of stuff with music, it gives you a little dopamine fix each time, because you're like, oh, they did the puzzle again. It worked. It all came together nicely and was, it feels good. Do it again. Yeah. And so that's the way one of my favorite songs off this record. And yeah, I would describe it as the art v science becoming best friends, and throwing it one hell of a bash.
It would be interesting to see art versus science cover this song, you know, in that context. Now we're talking.
Now we'll get Richard Kingsmill to okay it, because art v science, they might be in Double J territory as well. So we need to figure out exactly where we'd place the track, but we think we'd find a way.
Yeah.
All right. So the titular track, Deliverance, track 5. Tell us your thoughts, Johnno.
Well, what a rockin' track. And by the way, since we recorded our last episode, we've released this podcast out into the real world, which is exciting. We'd recorded the first 5 episodes over a couple of months, and we released them since the recording of our last episode. And I listened back to a couple, and I think, you know, it was fun to listen back to. But I think I've ruined the word rockin'. You know, I think I use the word rockin' a lot. You know, I have a limited musical vocabulary. It's, you know, like sometimes when people swear, it just doesn't sound right coming out of certain people's mouths, swear words. I think that's the same with me with the word rockin'. But I'm going to keep using it because I have a limited musical vocabulary. So I apologize in advance. But this tune is rockin'. I think it really epitomizes what we're talking about. in terms of the theme and the feel of the album, and of course the definition of the word. It's about reconnecting with why they do it. It's, to go hard, have fun, do it with good people. The line, I've been treating my friends just like hotel keys. You don't know you need them, oh yeah, till you're down on your knees. And I'm down here on my knees, encapsulates things perfectly. All the guitars are immense here. Tim's rhythm is brilliant. Davey's leads suit it perfectly. An awesome solo too. And Andy's bass lines kind of groove and connect all the right dots. So it's a brilliant tune. And at the end of City Lights, which is track 9, you get a snippet of a superb bluesy acoustic version of this song, which you get in its entirety as a B-side to the Deliverance single, which I think is in fact the last of the physical singles You Are My ever released. So there you go, Deliverance.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, that was one of my questions there, because from the acoustic drunken sing-along snippet is tantalizing, and yeah, it kind of made me think of the Stones there, where I think they've got the honky tonk woman is the electric version, and then they've got the acoustic version as well. And yeah, my preference there is for the acoustic version, because I guess it's a little more timeless, perhaps, where it does just seem to kind of like connect more directly with the bluesy kind of lineage it comes from, and so I'm curious to listen to this one. But yeah, I feel like once again we're boot scooting to this one. Like this is such a, I can just imagine some boot scooters if you are a boot scooter and you're looking for a track to, you're sick of all the kind of Billy Ray Cyrus. How many times could you possibly do it? You need to change it up every so often. And I'd throw this one in the mix. Another cool little lyric that I noted: you drink to remember, yeah, you drink to forget, just like writing songs like a letter never sent. Yeah, you kind of you touched on it before, in that Rogers being aware of his limitations and the problems in his life, and I guess that's the thing, is that like as a songwriter you're maybe incentivized not to fix stuff, because then you won't have anything to write about. That old debate: do you create good art if you're a healthy person? So, but anyway, I think it's an interesting idea, is that like, yeah, if you just write about someone, is that the same as sending them a message? Probably not, but I don't really care. I get the cool song out of it. So, the only other thing is I was one of those situations where I didn't really know in the song when he's saying Deliverance. I had no idea what that word was for maybe the first 10 years after this came out. And
I think.
Yeah. And for some reason, in the first building we were staying at, when we moved to Atlanta a few months back, they had some Pelotons in the gym, and I decided to call them Peloton, like a impaired Frenchman, and I was really enjoying saying it that way. So I'd just say it out of context every so often, and then eventually my I was like, "Can you fucking stop doing that?" So it was nice.
You're paying homage to this song.
Yeah, exactly. So it was nice to hear this again, so I could, rekindle my appreciation for saying a word with a slight French intonation.
And now in this song, there's like the lyric, I'll be up all night with a head full of neon, giving Deliverance and an old friend to Leon. Now I'm, I'll put my hands up, naive as they come. A head full of neon, is that just like, going out, neon lights, or is that like a drug reference,
Yeah, no, I wondered the same thing. Yeah, no, I just landed on like bright lights, big city.
Yeah, cool.
Getting overawed. But yeah, that was something I wondered, and I'm pretty hip with the kids on the street, and no one's told me what neon. You got to try a bit of this neon, mate. It's well nice. Get nice, yeah.
go on the dark web and go and check out Neon. But no, I don't think we'll find anything. Cool, good to know.
That's the homework for the listeners. Let's do that. The Neon epidemic sweeping the nation. All right, great track. Track 6, One Trick Pony.
Tony, yeah, One Trick Tony. So
that's what I was confused about, because sometimes it's saying One Trick Tony and sometimes it's Pony. And I did my due diligence and I thought I landed on Pony. So it's Tony.
Yeah, it's One Trick Tony. So during this period, Tim spent a bit of time living in Madrid. His now ex-wife is Spanish, and so this song is one of the few that references this period, I think, in this album. I don't know exactly what this song's about, but I think within is a feeling of being a bit all at sea in a different environment. In this case, an Anglo dude in the Spanish suburbs or towns, and obviously there's the language barrier among other things. I think he's enjoying the experience, but there's also a bit of fish out of water about it. And so I think the One Trick Tony in this song is perhaps Tim. You know, when you're in a country where you don't understand the language properly and you're living with people who don't speak your language, you feel like you're coming across as a bit of a one-dimensional figure, because you can't communicate properly and highlight the nuances that make you an interesting person. You're just the dude who hangs around and nods and smiles. And anyway, this is what I take from this track. I have a brief experience in this regard. People who know me from my other pod, and I may have mentioned it here, is I'm Italian-Australian. My parents were born in Italia, and I spent a couple of weeks once in Calabria with my parents and cousins, and it was so great. But it was tough going at times. No one's fault but my own, of course, for having such a rudimentary understanding of the language. But I remember feeling like a boring dude, a little useless and unable to communicate my real personality. But in any case, I might be projecting this. This means I might be projecting this when it comes to the meaning of this song. But a great tune and a super vocal take from Tim, I reckon, as well.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that experience living in Colombia for a few years, and it's a double-edged sword in that you could occasionally feel like the boring guy, but then there's other times you just miss so much small talk. It's amazing. No hablo español. And even if you do understand what they're saying, you can lean back on the fact that I don't really know what's going on, so leave me alone. So you can I'm on Smoko. And so you can get away with stuff there. But yeah, I felt, and I just checked, it's interesting. It's One Trick Pony on Wiki, but then on Spotify it's coming it's One Trick Tony on Wiki, and then on Spotify it's One Trick Pony, likewise with Apple Music. So come on, guys. Get your shit together. You've I like the lyric, you got to sing from your nuts. That's good advice. And I feel like this one kind of like broad takeaway I had from this album is the first kind of 5 tracks. It sounds like the same band as the first 5 albums, but I feel like the second half of this album, it does definitely have a more of a Tim Rogers solo feel about it. And I was trying to identify what that is exactly, because Tim Rogers has always been the solo songwriter in the band. They're 99% credited to Rogers, and I guess, and we'll get into this a little bit after we get through the tracks, but I found an article in The Age that came out a couple of years after this record came out, and it was just kind of going into more depth about Tim's life at the time and living in Spain, as you referenced, and this song is kind of hinting at, and making solo albums. And I guess because he'd kind of it was clear that the band had kind of they were spending less time apart, which is natural, I think, as everyone gets older, right? And so I definitely feel like it seems like a combination of where maybe Tim wasn't as he wasn't necessarily writing songs that would suit UMI as much as he would have in his early years. if in the second half of this album. And perhaps it cuts the other way as well, where the band isn't spending as much time with him and seeing like the tunes in their early iterations of this and helping him kind of craft it on tour or whatever. So I feel like in the second half of this album, and it's by no means a criticism, but it just definitely struck me as kind of like the first time that I really noticed where I was like, oh, this definitely just sounds like the Tim Rogers solo songs with UMI backing him up. Am I on the, can you hear that with the second half of this album?
Yeah, I can. I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest, but when you're mentioning it, yeah, there is a looseness to the second half of the album, which I think is a trait of some of Tim's solo records, where it's distinct. That's one of the distinguishing points from his solo and UMI records, where UMI records are generally, a bit tighter and a bit more like direct, whereas the solo records can be a bit looser and have a bit more space. So that there is, I think, an element there in the second half of this record. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
But yeah, apart from that, I don't really have too much else to say about this track. So let's move on. Track 7, The Wrong Side now. Johnno, tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, there's a lot of beauty in this tune. I love the cello intro. I love Tim's vocal tone here. His entry into the song is perfect, actually. And it's quite a lush song in many ways. Davy's solo adds to that feel. I'd call it an assured song musically. And lyrically, there's a bit of fragility. So I just think it mixes quite nicely. Kind of like putting mint in your iced drink. There's nice touches throughout this song. It's kind of a nice mix of feelings.
Yeah, and I don't really have too much to say on this, but I feel like that it's kind of like a nice counterbalance to some of the other tracks on the album. I think if you were just getting, knocked around muscular riffs nonstop and then kind of like Stonesy homage where, Till the Clouds Roll Away, Deliverance, and Nifty Little Number, which is track 8. So this kind of, I feel like slots in nicely. But yeah, not too much else to say about that.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate the muscularity elsewhere, doesn't it? Because you're right. If it's all muscular, it's like it all becomes a bit dime a dozen. So this is the beauty of a UMI album is you get taken on a journey, and from the muscular to the angular and everything in between.
All right, track 8, Nifty Little Number, Like You. Johnno, tell me your thoughts.
Love this tune. A sweet kind of bluesy take on the love song genre. A nice loose feel to it too, as we kind of mentioned, and a great live track. I recall this being played, on the old sports show, The Fat, hosted by Tony Squires, and it goes really well live, this song. And incidentally, I'm pretty sure Tim wrote and UMI recorded the theme song to The Fat's successor, which is called 110%. But yeah, Nifty Little Number Like You, it's a great kind of sing-along song as well. And the kind of repetition of the chorus, it works well in this number.
All right, so I've got a strange anecdote or a weird roundabout thing I want to talk about to get to this track. So there's this comedian I like, American guy called Kurt Metzger, and he grew up as a Jehovah's Witness and I think he abandoned that his beliefs and the church in his like early 20s. And now he's a degenerate, self-admitted degenerate dirtbag comedian, and he talks a lot about religion because of his upbringing. And he made this point, something that I went to a Christian school, very much Christian light, but a Christian all the same, in that why are Anglo-Saxon people in Australia in the year 2022 worshipping a Middle Eastern god from 2,000 years ago? And he said that he dated an Israeli girl, and then she was he would say, oh, just like Joshua in the Bible, and she would say who? Like she would say how you meant to pronounce it. And he said it kind of filled in the rest of the story for him, in that like it's futile for us to follow that story. Well, he's referring to himself, because it's not about him. It's not about his people or his era. It's about completely different people, completely different era. So I've always wondered that. And it kind of got me interested a lot more in terms of the Indigenous Australian spirituality and how they see life, because that's more directly connected to the land that I was living on. I was like, well, if I'm going to follow any spirituality or religion, may as well make it a home game, is the way I see it. And so to relate it back to this track, I guess what got me thinking is that, and it's perhaps because I'm down here in Atlanta, like deep south, like the birthplace of rock and roll. And I always found it interesting where just in our society, rock and roll, being a rocker is like an accepted identity. But then, and there's been many famous, well-renowned Australian bands, and there's plenty of like youth culture has embraced rock and roll since the 50s. But I remember like growing up and then discovering a band was like from Belgium or Holland, and being like singing, and them singing in American accents and being like, oh, they're not real rockers. Like you need to listen to like a UMI track, a guy from Kalgoorlie, to get the real kind of blues and rock and roll. So I fucking love this song, to be clear. It's a great hoedown, drunken sing along. Let's have some fun type of vibe. But it did get me, like the the appropriation word, like how far away, I guess I'll keep my question simple. Has the fact that UMI are just kind of following in the lineage of American rock and roll, just like the Stones did, has that ever bothered you where it'd be like, oh, I want you to sing about more kind of homespun stuff, or can you just play along and get taken away with the fantasy? I think I know the answer to this.
Well, I guess the way I've always entered UMI is from Tim's kind of viewpoint. So, and his reference points are often very local. So I've always kind of seen it, and I don't have that kind of musical background. So UMI is basically my starting point for rock and roll. Obviously, I was listening to music before that, but so I don't kind of listening to UMI. It was all kind of new to me, and the reference came from that, both forwards and backwards and sidewards. And so I guess I never had that feeling. And yeah, Tim's referencing in his lyrics always been very local. Obviously, Ali Daly, we spoke about a few episodes ago, which basically sounds like you're just looking out your bedroom window here in the suburbs. So yeah, but I guess sometimes you sort of you're thinking of ways to describe UMI. It's like they're a really unique, original band. But on the other hand, they're a rock and roll band in the tradition of many great rock and roll bands. So I guess it depends which frame you want to put on it. I'm keen to put on the former frame of original and unique band, because I really believe that. And there's a million ingredients that go into any kind of artistic endeavor, including being in a band. And I think that's the way I like to look at it. There are a million different ingredients, and the combination of whatever makes up UMI, with the four people involved and all their life experiences, and obviously the life experiences of Tim growing up all over the country, that kind of makes them unique and interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. And, I guess probably listening to this, I judged my 15-year-old self who was judging the Belgian and Dutch bands, because I was like, it's ultimately, if you can create good music, and even if you are borrowing heavily from a different culture, if the end product is good, and then who gives a shit? And I guess I'd been told a story that authenticity mattered in terms of where you can, and I guess I haven't really abandoned that in terms of spirituality or the religion stuff, as I touched on before, because I think, you may be barking up the wrong tree if you're trying to follow beliefs that came from thousands of years ago. But if you're just making a rockin' tune, keep it simple, stupid, and just get on down to the whole.
Yeah, I guess authenticity, it's a totally overused word now. I remember when we were traveling together in LA, we were sharing a room in Airbnb, and I think the authenticity word was kind of just becoming fashionable at that point. And I remember you put on a podcast as we were sort of going to sleep called "Authenticity is the New Black."
It was a
or something like that.
An Osher Gunsberg
That's right.
Little pod. When he was embarking on his podcast adventure. Yeah. And that was a big part of Osher's personal brand at the time, was authenticity. Yeah. And I think we threw that on for a little nighttime hate lesson just to send us off to sleep. So
but my point being that authenticity is, if you really love rock and roll, then it's authentic to play rock and roll music in that tradition. It would be inauthentic to try play something, I don't know, that, Brian Eno-esque kind of, elevator music or something that just so you're trying to be original or authentic or something. Being authentic is being kind of true to yourself. And if that means following in a tradition of decades of immense rock and roll, culture, then thank you, Osher.
to bring this full circle, I just remembered something from my high school. In my form room in grade 11, one of the teachers ripped out like the Aussie Bible, where it was like Bible stories but been updated to include like Australian vernacular or whatever. And then like one day Jesus went down to the watering hole, bumped into his cousin John the Baptist and said, "G'day, mate, what are you doing down here?" He said, "Oh, I'm just a bit lost and lonely." And so it's just like, referencing Jesus wearing double pluggers and shit like that. And so I was like, all right, I draw the line here. If you want to believe in this, this myth, the Judeo-Christian myth, but you've got to realize that it doesn't come from your culture. And you can still follow it and be a good person and blah blah blah, but don't try and tell me that it's yours and you created it. Is essentially where I draw the line with this type of shit. So
I'm with you.
Yeah. All right. So I think we did that one. Track 9, City Lights, an ode to Melbourne City, I believe.
Yeah. I define this as a nice little ditty, a love song set in Melbourne, as you say, but don't let the description of this song as a ditty fool you into thinking that it can be easily dismissed. It's a beautiful tune, and by the end of it, you're a fly on the wall as the characters of this track, hold each other's hands and whisper jokes into each other's ears as they skip along the banks of the Yarra at dusk on a hot, dry Melbourne day. Good stuff, evocative stuff.
Yeah, and it got me thinking, which Australian city owns UMI? Who can claim UMI? Came out of Sydney, and then, for the second half of the career, maybe longer now, been based out of Melbourne. And they're split actually. Tim and Davey, Melbourne, Andy Russ. Yeah. True. But where do you come down on it? If gun to your head, someone said, which city can claim UMI?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because Tim grew up in WA, spent time, I think, in a lot of different parts of the country.
Sydney and Adelaide,
his dad being like a traveling worker. And but I guess if you put in the gun to my head, I probably would say Melbourne now, just because, Tim and Davey based there. Tim's lived there for quite a while. I'm pretty sure he still lives there. And so, he became part of the Melbourne music scene. I think they have the biggest following in Melbourne, I feel. And obviously Melbourne being like I don't know if they still are, but they
Arts
were
hub.
considered arts hub. Yeah, so yeah, probably Melbourne if I had to.
Yeah, I recall watching I think it was that like light flood relief when there was that big tsunami and they played at the SCG, and I think they closed out the show. It was like a festival type of show, and they closed it out with How Much Is Enough, and he said this song is about this town.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, that kind of, I guess that probably sparked this question because it reminded me like, yeah, they were born out of Sydney, like, but that was kind of their. So I kind of would lean the other way. I kind of lean, where you cut your teeth kind of defines you forever a little bit. So
yeah, that's a good point. A lot those early albums, there's a lot of references to Sydney and different landmarks, and that obviously was a big part of their upbringing as a band. So yeah, I have to think about that one.
But yeah, in terms of, and just I guess my final thought on this track is, Tim's a fan of a nice long walk, so you kind of get that impression here that like this was, you can kind of picture him wandering around. And I've spent a bit of time in Melbourne. It's a nice place to kind of walk around and explore. And or perhaps a little sad in terms of like just kind of in retrospect, like understanding who's started a family, with his wife and young kid, and he talks about in his book like where he found out he was going to be a dad and like got a book about how to quit drinking, and then just wanted to kind of change and mature into this next phase, and it probably didn't work out exactly how he intended it to. And so I feel like this, but either way, this song is kind of like a nice window, I guess, into that his state of mind, it seems, where he was like trying to enter a new phase and kind of be a family guy and all that stuff. So but yeah,
I know what you mean. Like the relationship that kind of underpins a lot of this record and the subject matter of this record kind of went sour and stuff, and we won't sort of go into that, but yeah, either way, they're great songs, and Tim probably wants to forget a large chunk of it, but they are good tunes, and I don't know, hopefully like somewhere deep inside that, if these songs are a decent representation of that time, then that provides some kind of solace, that, there were good times and good experiences during that period. And, it was kind of worth the ride, I guess. But anyway.
Track 10, Crash.
Crash, yeah. Another assured tune. I don't think they were in the mindset to make this kind of song on Dress Me Slowly. There's more space to breathe on this record. And there's like a reward in this track with the beautiful delivery of the choruses, choruses you want to sing along to and be enveloped by. I have fond memories of seeing this song live at the Metro once. I think it was a tour that was in between albums, which always has a different vibe, perhaps a more relaxed vibe. Anyway, at this gig, they started with Crash. Tim came out with his acoustic guitar playing it solo, and then gradually Andy, Davey and Rusty joined him. And it gave me a new appreciation to this song. It was a really great version. It was a great gig, actually. And, yeah, Crash, a kind of a grower. And, yeah, like I say, the choruses that they're beautifully harmonised on that track. So I love singing along to Crash.
Yeah, I feel like it fits in well with the sequencing of the record, and yeah, I don't really have too much else to say, but yeah, I guess probably just continues in the theme of, I feel like, yeah, Tim Solo-ish type of tune where still works on the record, and but yeah, just feels like a different era compared to the first 5 albums where I guess it was the songs where there's seemingly more of the band's touches on other songs, the earlier albums, whereas these ones are like Tim solos and the band's playing on it, but it's, a Tim song, capital T, capital S. But yeah, that's my only real thought on this one. Yeah. Basically the same point as I mentioned before. Track 11, Nothing's Ever Gonna Be the Same Again. We got some cowbell, baby.
Yeah.
Tell me your thoughts.
I Another one I'd say that's set somewhere in the burbs or the towns or the outskirts of Madrid. And I love this tune. It really sounds like nothing else in the You Are My canon. Rusty kind of plays his part perfectly to get the feel of a local street party or a gathering or, extended family coming together with cousins and aunts and uncles. And there's Tim in the middle of it, seemingly like having a ball. In One Trick Tony, he's maybe a bit all at sea, but here he's in the moment and sort of loving life. So really fun tune. And yeah, I guess it starts off with a kind of a different sort of beat and guitar sound, but there's also kind of familiar kind of chorus, sing-along chorus. So I think it works really well.
Yeah, I feel like once again it's got a little hoedown happening here, and I feel like it's interesting. As I mentioned before, found out he was going to be a dad. Got the book on how to quit drinking. I think it's kind of referenced in the lyrics a little bit in this song, perhaps. But yeah, and I feel like it's as a man with a child, I've got the general belief in that people who no one wants to hear about your kid, basically, is my general rule, because I know how I felt when I didn't have a kid. So I try and pay that forward, where it's like, I want your kid to be happy and healthy, don't want to hear about them. And so sounds callous, but as a general rule, I kind of, again, maybe it's because you kind of know what was happening in his life, and like maybe reading Tim's book and just seeing like what a uncertain young guy he was, and like all the turmoil he went through, going to university and stuff like that. I'm very happy to get the kind of this whole sentiment, nothing's ever going to be the same again, because as someone who became a father, I think what's interesting is, and it's maybe touched on a little bit in this song, and maybe it's more just like a meta interpretation, because I know what happened with his life, and kind of from reading his book and following along, but nothing's ever going to be the same again, in that you now have someone you love more than anything else in the world, and you have a really strong intention to change and make them your priority. But then I guess the one thing that doesn't change is that you're still you, and you've got your own baggage and bullshit that you have to deal with and overcome. And so things aren't the same except yourself. And so I think maybe that was something that I thought about with this song, is that I remember that euphoria and that kind of excitement that comes with kind of like a new phase, new era of becoming a father and all that. But then, it's also kind of like the difficulty of being like, oh, fuck, I've still got all my shortcomings that I need to try and make work to make myself and this kid happy. So, right. It kind of got me thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. Yeah. Great little tune. All right.
I did it, though. I mentioned my kid, and
I don't mind. Love Billy.
All right. So track 12, When You Know What You Want. This is a goodie.
Yeah, a song kind of full of wisdom and really like evocative. The strings help with that vibe, I guess. And I said earlier, I think what I said earlier is kind of relevant about what matters and what doesn't, kind of working that out in your life. And I think When You Know What You Want walks that line, I reckon. And it's a beautiful way to stroll out of the album. We kind of stroll in with the kind of intro to Words for Sadness, and we stroll out with When You Know What You Want. So, I think it's a really beautiful way to end the album. I remember a really nice version of this song played by Tim and Tex with the Sydney Symphony or something at Sydney's Domain. It was one of those like picnicky kind of festivals. I think you would have hated it, but it was a great version. Those like where everyone gets a blanket and it's a bit weird, but it was a great version of that song, despite the weird vibe.
Yeah, I really like this tune. The line that jumps out at me: sleep is there to hug you, caress you, and to drug you. On it you can depend, I know that you're a man. You got a touch of the insomnia every so often, Johnno,
yeah,
right?
sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, and it was weird when I was a younger, more like when I was a kid, teenager. I used to occasionally get insomnia, and just the futility and anger that you'd feel. And fortunately now I sleep pretty well, but I'd say like once every 2 months I get a insomnia bout, and by this point I kind of know how it operates, and it's just kind of like your brain, almost like a bad acid trip or coming down from acid, where it's just like, have you thought about the time you screwed over your friend when you were 8 years old? And then, oh, that was a nice green hill you saw once in Denmark. And then like, do you remember this B-side from Jefferson Airplane that you listened to twice? And you're like, so it's borderline amusing now, like that happens. And I managed to get to sleep eventually, but yeah, just the freedom that you have when you don't have that paranoid neuroses, and you can actually, when your head hits the pillow, you feel like you've actually doing what you intended to do, and you are tomorrow you're going to continue doing what you should do as well. And what I like about this song is that it feels like it's written, the delivery is serene, and it seems to contain wisdom and all that, but it seems like he's writing it from the other side, though. My guess is that he's writing it from a perspective of like when he doesn't know what he's want, when he's feeling lost, when he's feeling jangly. And it does remind me a little bit of the anecdote. I'm not sure if it's included in the book or is just on the press tour for Detours, but he would say that when he would come home drunk, he'd write himself notes to read when he was hungover the next day of his euphoria and how much fun he had and how easy it was for him to connect with the people he was out with, so that the next day when he's coming down or hungover or feeling sick, he can read those notes and they can provide solace. So I like that concept here, and just in terms of something about the song makes me feel like it's someone who doesn't know what he wants, but he's kind of reassuring himself that when he does, he's going to get all this great stuff, such as the sense of direction and the long, solid 8 hours, which is pretty fun.
No, I like the way you think about that. And there is, sleep is, or lack of sleep is directly related to a settled or unsettled mind. So I think looking at it from the other side of the river is a good way of looking at it, actually. So it is a beautiful song. And I guess the way you describe it, it's more of a song of yearning rather than of someone who has worked it out. So that kind of makes it a bit more interesting as well.
Yep. All right. So that's the record.
Yeah.
So in terms of what happened after it came out, it reached number 12 on the ARIA charts. And when did... Okay, so I want to get a timeline on this. When did Tim Rogers punch Mark Holden at the Adelaide airport?
I'm not sure if he punched him, but he accosted him, I think, at an airport.
Yeah.
Your Honour. And so, I think, I think it was kind of around this time. So I think you shared an article from 2004, and that kind of sheds a bit more light on it. So the Dress Me Slowly period, they were obviously... There was a lot of pressure for you and I to make a return on the investment that the record company had put in, because BMG had bought Rue Art, and Tim was like a prized asset, and so they were putting money into it, and they wanted them to get that return on investment. So there was that record company guy, was it Dave Nivol or something, who would look over Tim's shoulder basically as he's writing songs, going, I think less idiosyncrasy and more kind of babies and maybe babies or something to try and get more hooks and stuff like that. So all that sort of pressure built up, and then obviously Dress Me Slowly didn't go that well, and then I think they released this album through BMG, their last time through BMG, but without much support, I think, and then following that, it was kind of the writing was on the wall that relationship was over. And so in that time, I think that the end of the relationship with BMG came where I think the band asked for a bit of financial assistance to get an American tour going. BMG were at the point where like, oh, nah, this is like a sunk investment or whatever the term is. We're not making any money from you, and we don't see this investment going any further, so we're not going to support you for the tour. So obviously, I wouldn't have been happy with that. Would have felt that was really unfair. And in that period, Australian Idol is huge, and like the manufactured pop star is huge. So that's all kind of like the juxtaposition to what you and I are trying to be, this real rock and roll band, salt of the earth kind of stuff. So it's kind of that real juxtaposition. And Australian Idol, Mark Holden's one of the judges. And Australian Idol, like you look back now and it kind of, it seems a bit naff, but it was like a cultural phenomenon. It was an enormous show. It was enormous all over the world. But when these kind of shows broke, the first few years were just enormous. And so I guess in that period, there would have been a bit of angst building up from Tim. And then I think Tim maybe was like before or after that period, whenever the BMG sort of rejected the request for assistance for an American tour, Tim saw Mark Holden at an airport and accosted him and said, you cost my band this or that, and he regrets it obviously, but I'm sure there's a part of him who's like, I'm glad I did that. There's a part of a few other people who say that as well, but not that we're condoning that sort of thing, but tough time. So.
Yeah, I'd recommend the article. It's called "Hoist the Jolly Rogers." It's still up on the age.com.au. This was published 18 years ago, but it's kind of, it just goes through what you outlined, and I think does a pretty good job of illustrating the kind of fuck you attitude the band had at the time, which I think bled into Deliverance and maybe just the way they operated after Dress Me Slowly. And there's an anecdote in the article where he's talking to the journo from The Age for this article at a pub, and there's some people at the bar who are like, nodding in his direction, and like they overhear Heavy Heart, and Tim kind of, puts his chest out, something he feels affronted, but then they come over and they're nice and they end up having drinks together. And so anyway, I think it's kind of like this was kind of like an embracing of what we discussed last week, where it's like, let's put aside those lofty ambitions for like global dominance and all that stuff, and let's play music and let's, give our fans in Australia what they want. I feel like that kind of continued until now, pretty much, it seems.
Yeah, and that article's interesting. That anecdote that you referenced about he was kind of taking offence to what he thought people were saying about him in that pub.
Yeah,
and I guess that kind of alludes to something I referenced before. Was like, when you're such a great observationalist, there are drawbacks to that, and sometimes that means you're reading into situations that don't necessarily exist. So, and sometimes you might see it at gigs where he'll kind of be unhappy with something that he thinks someone said, or because you have such an observational skill that you can sort of imagine how things are unfolding. So in this situation, he thinks they're kind of making fun of him, and then he kind of walks past them, and then the guy says, "Oh, mate, I don't know if you know, but Heavy Heart sort of means the world to me and my wife, and it's one of my favorite songs or whatever." And then they end up having like drinks together, and they kind of have a lovely time. So it kind of is a good anecdote that represents a bit of stuff we've been talking about, I guess, over the last few episodes. But I do want to say, just as we finish up, Deliverance is absolutely worthy of the UMI canon. Like, I'd say it's quite underrated, and I've really enjoyed the last couple of weeks with it, because it makes you feel like good about the world. Because I think the framing of the band's history is that the band was having a hard time around Dress Me Slowly and Deliverance, as we know, we've spoken about, and things were going awry with the record label. And then they came out of this period and then, released the immense Convicts, And, you know, it was kind of like this was a dip in a way, is the way the framing is. And some of that might be true, but that shouldn't fool people into thinking this album isn't worthwhile in terms of consideration. It absolutely is. You leave the album feeling, I think, better about the world. And as I mentioned, you know, some of the subject matter means that Tim probably wants to forget a lot of it, but they're good records, and I really enjoyed my last couple of weeks with Deliverance. It's kind of a loose, relaxed, but like assured album, and I think it's really worthwhile people revisiting it if they kind of dismissed it over the years because of that kind of narrative around the band at the time. Yeah, just want to make that point.
And I what I said before in terms of the second half of the album feeling more like a Tim solo album, I that's by no means I appreciate that. I kind of like the looseness of it. Whereas if you can, you know, the Dress Me Slowly and Convicts coming up, I would say that both of those have a consistent band sound throughout the entirety. Whereas this one, I kind of like the way that it becomes, more of a Tim Rogers solo, in my opinion, in the second half. Because, it just varies it up. And I don't feel like you get that much on many of the other records. So, I think definitely would have been my least listened to You and My album. And it was a good opportunity to actually immerse myself in it a bit more. All right, time for the ceremony. Bronze, silver, gold. Johnno, what you thinking? Why don't I go first? I think you always go first. So we'll save you for the finale. So that's what the fans want. All right. So my bronze is ribbons and bows, the arts and science coming together. Silver, Deliverance, just because I wanted to say it that way one more time. And my gold would be When You Know What You Want.
Oh yeah, fantastic. I will go bronze. Who Put the Devil in You? Just such a rocker. Dave Grohl, rock pig.
Muscular Grolsy on the protein powder.
Silver, Nifty Little Number Like You, and gold, Crash, which kind of makes me think, you know, often as I like this, and I think this shows that UMI is a brilliant band, and also shows the nature of music fandom, that often our preferences don't really overlap at all. Like this one, I don't think we have a consistent song between our two lists, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's also kind of a you know, when you meet someone, they're like, "Oh, what's your favorite album?" And you're like, "Okay," it's kind of like going to a restaurant. You want to pick like the second most expensive thing on the menu, or the second most expensive bottle of wine. Like, so you in your head, you automatically go for one, but then you judge it. Like you might say, "Oh, Sgt. Pepper's," and then you'll be like, "Oh, actually, it's Aphex Twin." You know, like so. Yeah. I feel like I at least have a similar impulse here, in that sometimes my first choice, the ones I would automatically go to, is actually my favorite, and then other times I'm playing 3D chess with myself, where it's like, no,
I know.
You've just picked that one because you think that's the one you should like the most, but then in actuality it's this other one over here that's the one you like the most. Why are you lying on a podcast where you can say whatever the fuck you want? So it is interesting to force yourself to do that, because you're like, Desert Island, if you could only listen to 3, what would it be? And so, we get to the truth of the matter here.
Yeah, no, I've definitely had, you know, post podcast wanderings around the streets, just going, you know, what was I thinking? Like, yes, you know, scratching my head. Geez, why did I? I was just trying to be too clever by half, weren't you, Johnno? But not today. I'm pretty confident. I'm happy with my top 3.
Well, there's always next week to square the ledger if you Mumford up.
Next week.
So next week's going to be a goodie. As Johnno mentioned, the pods are out in the world now. So, this will basically come out in real time. So if you want to get in touch, we now have a email address. It's in the episode description. It's jandbpoddy@gmail.com. All the normal ones were taken, so I went slightly off the beaten track. So it's jandbpoddy@gmail.com. Send us your thoughts and feelings, and we'll have a chat in the next episode about them. But thanks for listening. Johnno, till next week. Catch you later.
See you, Tommy. Thanks, everyone. Chat soon.